California mom Sherri Papini claiming she was abducted while jogging.
A woman has been arrested more than 5 years after her mysterious alleged abduction.
In March of 2022, Sherri Papini would make headline news, but not for the same reason she did back in November of 2016. This time, she was arrested and is being charged with making a false statement to a federal agent and mail fraud. She is accused of faking her own kidnapping and collecting $30,000 from the California Victims Compensation Board and from a GoFundMe account made for her and her family. Well, ladies and gentlemen, this is the story of Sherri Papini, the woman who faked her own kidnapping. In 2016, Sherri Papini made headlines after her bizarre disappearance that brought panic to the Redding community. Her story made the headlines of every newscast, and her face was pinned up everywhere on missing posters. To the astonishment of everyone, she showed up Thanksgiving Day of 2016, battered and bruised, but she was thankfully alive. The events that unfolded next would send investigators and the FBI on a chase after two Hispanic women that never existed. On the day she went missing, her husband Keith came home from work to an abnormal scene of silence. No wife and no kids. Upon investigating, he realized his kids had never been picked up by Sherri from daycare. He tracked her phone, realizing it was still in the location she said she was going for a run. Once Keith arrived at the scene, she wasn't at this location, but her cell phone and earbuds were distinctly placed in the dirt with her earbuds wrapped around her phone. A piece of her hair was tangled in the wire of the earbuds. Her cell phone was still playing their wedding song that she had on repeat. Keith notified authorities of her disappearance, and the search for Sherri Papini began. From the beginning, this case has red flags, and they multiply as the investigation goes on. The way she just disappeared made no real sense unless she just vanished, and besides the piece of hair, there was no real evidence of a struggle. This investigation was starting off in a weird direction. If she was taken like she claims, why was her headphones neatly wrapped around her cell phone? More than likely, they would have been taken with her and discarded along the way. The elaborate story that she comes up with how and where she was before her astonishing reappearance begins to make sense once we dig a little bit deeper into her past. Now, the details in this case are strangely similar to a case from the evening of August 22nd, 1998, when 16-year-old Tara Smith went missing after she went out for a jog in Redding, California. To make things even more interesting, Tara and Sherri were high school friends. Is this where Sherri came up with the idea to fake her disappearance and kidnapping? The more we dig into the case, the more everything begins to make sense. Over the investigation, the story she told was never the same, but this is what she claimed happened the day she disappeared. Now, if I went over every detail, that would take forever because there is a 55-page report that goes over every time investigators talk to her about what happened. Honestly, the story is so detailed each time she tells it that you can tell Sherri is a compulsive liar due to how much information she tries to give investigators about her time she was gone, but the overall story goes as follows. While she was out on her jog, a dark-colored SUV with two Hispanic women pulled up next to her. She thought the woman was needing help, and as she got closer to the SUV, the woman pulled out a gun, instructing her to get into the back seat. Before Sherri got into the car, she placed her phone and headphones on the ground to be found as evidence. She couldn't remember any details during the drive because she was falling asleep the whole time. Later on, she believed she must have been drugged with something to make her fall asleep. After that, she remembers waking up in a room with different clothes on and having her hands zip-tied behind her back. She also said she was able to chew through the zip ties and tried to break free, but the Hispanic woman would come in with a taser, and this is why she believes her memory is so foggy. She never actually stated how she was able to get her hands from being tied behind her back to her mouth, and she also said that the women would tell her that they were selling her to a cop, so no one was going to be looking for her. After a few weeks, they decided to get her back in the SUV and throw her out of the car in Woodland City. Now, this account that I just told you is told to investigators many different times, and each time it is completely different, so we won't be going over all the details from all the times she told her story to investigators. After investigators began digging through her cell phone and cell phone records, uncovering two male friends who were listed in her contacts as females. One man claimed to know Sherri for some time and even traveled to meet up with her in 2011. The other said he met Sherri in 2000 and they dated for some time before breaking up, but always kept in contact with each other. He stated that during and after their relationship, he learned that she was a compulsive liar and would come up with these elaborate stories of how she was abused as a child, but the stories would always be different. When Sherri returned and was in the hospital, investigators sent her clothes in for DNA testing. DNA from a male suspect was found in her clothing, but Sherri never mentioned any males in any of her stories. They ran the DNA through the database and it was a match for an ex-boyfriend of hers. Finally, in August of 2020, he agreed to an interview with investigators. The two had known each other since they were teenagers and she contacted him saying she was trying to escape her abusive husband. He said he drove to meet her at her residence after her morning jog and took her to his place in Southern California. His cousin also told investigators she had seen her in his place of residence. During her stay, he claimed he didn't physically assault her at all, but she did all that to herself. She didn't want to eat very much, she cut her own hair, and even asked him to brand her with something purchased from Hobby Lobby. On Thanksgiving Day, he drove her back, and that is where she was located. Investigators also found 2 prepaid cell phones that they would use to communicate with each other. After this interview, investigators even gave her a chance in another interview, stating they didn't believe her story and that it was a crime to lie to federal investigators. She continued on that her story was real. Now, during this time, she collected $49,000 from a GoFundMe for her family and $30,000 from the California Victims Compensation Board. Now, whatever was going on through her mind to make her want to fake a kidnapping and have investigators search for 2 Hispanic women is beyond me. The sad part of this story is that the 2 Hispanic women were being searched for in this fake kidnapping. People would actually call in with leads on who they thought the suspects could be. This could have potentially been disastrous for anyone if investigators had actually tried to follow up with these leads that were being called in. The good thing is they more than likely didn't really believe her story since the beginning. Now her family and children will not have to live in the shadow of Sherri Papini